The morning sun had barely crested over the ridges of a park in the United States of America, casting long shadows across the landscape as a group of 5 hikers made their way along a narrow, winding trail. The sky above was a bright blue, and the towering trees flanked the path, giving the illusion of safety in the wilderness. Among the group were Caleb, the most experienced of the hikers, his cousin Owen, friends Sawyer and Garrett, and Maya, an avid nature enthusiast eager to capture the perfect photograph of the wild beauty around them. The trail they had chosen was less popular, weaving through steep ridges with abrupt drop-offs that tumbled into rocky ravines below. The sense of adventure heightened as they ascended higher, the path narrowing with each step. Overhead, birds occasionally called, and in the distance, the faint rush of a river echoed through the still air. As they rounded a sharp bend in the trail, a sudden rustling sound echoed from the dense brush ahead. Caleb signaled the group to halt, his senses alert. In the silence that followed, the source of the sound became painfully clear. A grizzly bear cub, no older than a few months, emerged from the bushes on the trail ahead of them. The cub, curious and unaware of the group, paused to sniff the air, its small frame adorably clumsy, but a stark reminder that where there was a cub, a mother was indeed not far behind. The hikers froze, their eyes wide with apprehension. Caleb, his heart now pounding, gestured for the group to slowly back away. But before they could make any headway, a heavy grunt came from behind them, echoing up the trail. There, from the direction they had just come, a massive female grizzly bear emerged, her fur bristling and her dark eyes locking onto the hikers with deadly intent. She was much closer than the cub, and far more dangerous. The hikers now found themselves in an impossible situation. The mother grizzly stood behind them, her hulking figure blocking the only path down, while the cub was directly in front, its confused mewling drawing the mother closer. They were trapped, with cliffs dropping off on either side of the narrow trail and nowhere to flee without risking a fatal fall. The grizzly mother let out a deep, guttural growl, a clear sign of her growing agitation. She was torn between protecting her cub and eliminating what she saw as a threat. Her massive body shifted on the path, her claws scraping against the loose rock and dirt as she began to inch forward. The cub, hearing its mother, started to meander toward her, but the group stood in its way. Caleb motioned to retreat slowly, stepping backward inch by inch, but as the group complied, disaster struck. Garrett, who had been standing closest to the edge of the trail, placed his weight on a patch of loose rock. The ground beneath him gave way without warning, sending him tumbling toward the cliff edge. His arms flailed as he tried to catch himself, but the sudden movement startled the already tense grizzly. The mother bear charged. Her massive frame barreled forward with terrifying speed, closing the gap in mere seconds. Caleb's heart raced as he watched Garrett scramble to regain his footing. The sudden surge of movement from the bear sent loose rocks cascading down the cliffside, the sound of them crashing below adding to the chaos. The hikers were in a state of panic now, their retreat faltering. The mother grizzly's powerful strides brought her terrifyingly close, her teeth bared and eyes wild with fury. Maya stumbled backward, her camera clattering to the ground, forgotten in the sheer terror of the moment. Garrett managed to stop his fall just as the bear reached the group. Her massive paw swiped through the air, narrowly missing him but striking Owen, who had been closest to Garrett, in an attempt to help him. Owen crumpled to the ground, gasping as the bear's claws raked across his torso, leaving deep gashes that immediately began to bleed. Sawyer, in his desperation to avoid the bear's attack, made a break for the cliffside, misjudging the distance. His foot slipped on the crumbling rocks, and he went down hard, his body skidding dangerously close to the edge. The sharp stones beneath him tore through his clothes and skin, but the proximity to the sheer drop kept him frozen in place, unable to move without risking falling to his death. Caleb, paralyzed by the sight of his friend's injuries, struggled to think. The bear, now fully committed to defending her cub, reared up on her hind legs, standing over 7 feet tall. She let out a roar that echoed through the canyon, her massive bulk casting a long shadow over the crumpled hikers below her. As the bear came down on all fours again, her eyes flicked toward Garrett, who was still scrambling to find solid ground. The movement caught her attention, and she charged again, her claws digging deep into the earth. Garrett, realizing too late that he was her next target, barely managed to roll to the side as the grizzly lunged. but his movements caused the cliff edge to give way beneath him. His body plunged downward, arms grasping at air as he fell, disappearing from view as the group helplessly watched. Owen, gasping for breath through the pain, tried to crawl away, leaving a trail of blood in his wake. Caleb, now fully realizing the hopelessness of the situation, frantically searched for a way to get the group out of this nightmare. The cub had wandered off the trail, and the mother bear, still enraged, was pacing back and forth, growling menacingly, her eyes darting between the remaining hikers. Maya, shaking with fear, pulled herself up from the dirt, only to see that Sawyer had slid even closer to the cliff's edge. His fingers clawed at the loose ground, desperately trying to find purchase. Caleb moved toward him, hoping to pull him back to safety, but the bear caught sight of the movement. With a terrifying roar, she lunged again. Caleb's heart raced as the grizzly charged straight at him. He could feel the ground trembling beneath her weight as she closed the distance. Just as she was about to reach him, Maya threw herself in the opposite direction, hoping to distract the bear. The grizzly hesitated for a split second, her attention shifting between Caleb and Maya before she finally turned toward her cub, now out of sight down the trail. The bear, sensing that her cub had wandered away, gave one final growl before retreating down the trail, her massive body vanishing into the underbrush. The hikers, bruised, bleeding, and terrified, could only stare at each other in disbelief, the weight of what had just happened sinking in. Caleb looked down the cliff where Garrett had fallen, the silence below unbearable. The group, though alive, was shattered. Their bond tested in the most harrowing of circumstances. The wilderness had brutally reminded them that in Yellowstone, nature held the ultimate power. The sun rose over the zoo, casting long shadows across the enclosures. Frank Mulligan, a seasoned veteran of over 30 years, walked his familiar route one last time, filled with memories of the animals he had cared for. Today marked his retirement, a bittersweet milestone. Beside him was Sam, an enthusiastic rookie eager to learn the ropes. Sam's energy was infectious as he peppered Frank with questions about the animals and zoo operations. Frank, patient yet measured, offered advice, allowing Sam to observe and learn. Their dynamic was evident. Frank's cautious experience contrasted sharply with Sam's reckless enthusiasm. As they approached the brown bear enclosure, Frank's gaze fell on Kodiak, the zoo's largest bear, a hulking presence he had cared for since cubhood. Frank respected Kodiak's moods, always mindful of the bear's potential danger. Sam, however, had little direct interaction with Kodiak and was about to witness the bear management process for the first time. But as they neared the entrance, Frank noticed a maintenance panel ajar, its bolts loosened, likely overlooked by a careless worker. Unease gripped him as he realized the danger. This panel provided access to a service gate, the only barrier between Kodiak and freedom. In an instant, Kodiak sensed the opportunity. Frank's heart raced as he watched the bear grip the loose gate with its powerful paw and tug it open. Before either man could react, Kodiak slipped through, emerging into the zoo's public area. Panic erupted as the first visitors spotted the massive bear. Screams filled the air, and chaos ensued as people scattered in all directions, fleeing from the predator now roaming freely. Frank's heart pounded in his chest as he assessed the situation. This was no longer about preventing an escape. It was now a race to stop a catastrophe. Kodiak, disoriented by the sudden freedom, was unpredictable and dangerous. Frank knew what the bear was capable of, and with frightened visitors running chaotically, the potential for disaster was immense. Sam, his voice trembling, pointed to a tranquilizer gun mounted on a nearby wall. Frank shook his head, knowing it wasn't a quick fix. The tranquilizers would take too long to subdue an animal of Kodiak's size, and firing in a crowded area could only make the situation worse. This would have to be handled up close, carefully, and with precision. Frank's mind raced as he tried to formulate a plan. He knew Kodiak's habits. If they could guide him back toward the enclosure, they might have a chance. But Sam had other ideas. The rookie's impulse was to chase the bear, attempting to corner it using vehicles and barriers. Frank, though, knew that chasing Kodiak would only escalate the bear's aggression. As Sam darted off to execute his plan, Frank felt a surge of frustration. The young keeper's inexperience was driving him into dangerous decisions. Frank stayed back, using his knowledge of Kodiak to keep the bear in sight but at a safe distance, hoping to steer the massive creature without provoking a confrontation. However, Sam's risky approach quickly backfired. A group of zoo workers attempted to block Kodiak's path using a small utility vehicle. The bear, feeling trapped, reacted with terrifying speed. With a guttural roar, he charged the car, flipping it effortlessly. The workers fled, leaving the vehicle a crumpled heap. Kodiak, now agitated, reared up on his hind legs, towering over the scene, his claws slashing at the air. Frank knew they were losing control. Kodiak's aggression was escalating rapidly, and if they didn't intervene quickly, someone would be seriously hurt or worse. He abandoned his cautious distance and moved in closer, heart pounding, knowing this was a critical moment. Kodiak turned toward a cluster of fleeing visitors. Frank could see the fear in their faces, and his instincts took over. With no other options, he grabbed a metal rod from a nearby supply shed and waved it in the air, making himself as large and intimidating as possible. Kodiak's attention shifted, his beady eyes locking onto Frank. It was a calculated risk. Frank knew the bear recognized him, but no guarantee would stop an attack. For a moment, Kodiak hesitated. The bear, now only a few yards away, growled deeply, his massive paws leaving gouges in the earth as he tested Frank's resolve. The air between them was thick with tension, each second dragging on for what felt like an eternity. Frank stood his ground, unflinching as Kodiak sized him up. But the standoff couldn't last forever. Suddenly, Kodiak lunged forward, the ground shaking under his weight. Frank reacted, sidestepping the bear's charge just in time, the massive paw swiping inches from his body. The rod in Frank's hand was useless against the sheer power of the bear's movements. All he could do now was stay alive long enough for help to arrive. The bear wheeled around quicker than Frank had expected, and this time, there was no avoiding the collision. Kodiak struck with brutal force, sending Frank sprawling to the ground. The impact knocked the wind from his lungs, but Frank managed to roll out of the way as Kodiak's claws came down again, gouging the dirt where Frank had just been. Desperation surged through Frank. He couldn't outrun the bear, and he certainly couldn't overpower it. But he could still outthink it. He grabbed a nearby bucket of fish meant for the polar bears and hurled it toward Kodiak. The sudden smell of food caught the bear's attention, and for a moment, Kodiak was distracted. It was all Frank needed. With adrenaline surging through him, Frank scrambled to his feet and used the few precious seconds to lead Kodiak back toward the enclosure. The bear followed, now more interested in the fish than the chaos around him. Frank's heart raced as they neared the gate, the plan coming together. As Kodiak entered the enclosure, Frank slammed the gate shut behind him, securing the bolts in place. He leaned against the fence, gasping for breath, his body trembling from the exertion and fear. The Wilson family had planned this camping trip in the Adirondacks for months. Mark and Sarah, along with their two young children, Emma and Jacob, had spent countless hours preparing, eager to escape the noise and rush of their suburban lives for a few days in the crisp, quiet wilderness. It was late October, and the Adirondacks were bathed in the golden hues of autumn, with leaves crunching underfoot and the scent of pine and earth thick in the air. For the children, this was an adventure. A weekend of campfires, marshmallows, and sleeping under the stars. Their campsite sat nestled among the towering trees, miles away from the nearest ranger station. The remoteness added to the allure, but it also meant they were on their own if anything went wrong. Still, Mark had always considered himself well-versed in camping. He was confident in their safety, especially after setting up their tent at a distance from where they'd store their food and cook their meals. They had read all the pamphlets about wildlife, and Mark had assured Sarah they'd be fine as long as they followed the rules about food storage. But the Adirondacks were home to creatures that operated under different rules, creatures driven by the unrelenting need to survive, especially as winter loomed. The black bears, normally elusive and uninterested in humans, were in a frenzy of feeding, fattening themselves up for hibernation. Even a whiff of poorly stored food could become an irresistible draw. That afternoon, they thoroughly enjoyed themselves. The kids had run through the forest, climbing rocks and collecting leaves, their laughter echoing off the hills. As the sun dipped below the horizon and the air turned colder, Mark lit the campfire, and they roasted hot dogs and marshmallows. The children, exhausted but happy, curled up in their sleeping bags early. Mark and Sarah stayed by the fire a little longer, enjoying the peace that only the wilderness could provide. What Mark didn't realize, however, was that earlier in the day, when he hastily packed away the remnants of lunch, he had left traces of food near the tent, a smear of peanut butter here, a wrapper there. To him, it seemed insignificant, but to a bear preparing for hibernation, it was enough. The first sign of trouble came just after dusk. There was a rustling in the distance, a sound too large to be a raccoon or deer. Mark, standing at the edge of the firelight, peered into the darkness. It was probably nothing, he thought, though a chill of unease settled over him. He dismissed it, returning to the fire and stoking it higher, hoping to ward off the biting cold. Later, as the family settled into their tent for the night, a soft grunt echoed through the trees. It was low and distant, but unmistakable to anyone familiar with the Adirondacks. Sarah's hand tightened on Mark's arm. A black bear. Likely just passing through, he assured himself, though his mind raced. Black bears were generally timid, but it was late in the season, and this one might be more aggressive, desperate to find enough calories to survive the coming months. The snapping of twigs grew louder as the bear drew near to their camp. Mark, heart pounding, slipped on his boots and grabbed a flashlight. Bears were usually scared off by noise or bright lights, but as he stepped outside the tent and shone the beam into the dark forest, he saw nothing. The silence was unnerving, but Mark knew the bear was close. It had picked up the scent of their food. Hidden in the shadows, the bear, a large male over 300 pounds, circled the campsite with eerie stealth. It had already begun to lose its natural caution, drawn by the promise of an easy meal. Suddenly there was a loud crash. The bear had found the food storage, knocking over the cooler. Mark cursed under his breath. Grabbing the air horn from the emergency kit, he blasted it into the night. The bear hesitated briefly, its ears flicking in irritation, but it didn't leave. It was hungry, and fear had given way to determination. The bear loomed just beyond the firelight, a massive dark figure barely visible against the trees. Inside the tent, Sarah clutched their children, Emma and Jacob, trying to calm them while her panic surged. She could hear the bear pawing at their supplies. Mark hurled rocks at the beast, hoping to drive it off, but the bear was undeterred. Its patience was growing thin, and Mark realized the real danger wasn't just in the food. It was in the bear's persistence. Hours passed in tense silence as the bear stalked the campsite, returning after every scare tactic. Mark kept the fire high, praying it would be enough to keep the bear at bay. At one point, the bear brushed against the tent, its massive body pressing against the thin fabric. Inside, Sarah could hear its heavy breathing, just inches from her children. As the night dragged on, Mark's mind raced. Could they run to the car? No, it was too risky. They were miles from help, and escape in the dark was impossible. Their only option was to wait for the morning, hoping the bear would finally retreat. Just as the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, a sharp snap echoed through the woods. The bear, startled by the awakening forest, finally turned and disappeared into the shadows, leaving the family shaken but alive. The Appalachian Mountains stretched endlessly with their dense, rugged forests. As dawn broke, Jack moved silently through the underbrush, his boots barely making a sound on the damp earth. The sun's early rays cast long shadows, and the forest stirred with the soft rustling of waking wildlife. Having hunted these woods for over 2 decades, Jack knew the terrain intimately. His goal today was a mature buck he'd been tracking for days based on fresh tracks he'd seen by the creek. Every step Jack took was precise and measured, reflecting his deep familiarity with the wilderness. The forest, thick with towering oaks and maples, created a canopy of green and gold, filtering sunlight into a dotted pattern. Jack's rifle was slung over his shoulder, and his camouflage attire blended seamlessly with the surroundings. His breath was steady, his heartbeat slow. He was entirely in his element. As Jack followed the fresher tracks more profoundly into the woods, he noticed broken twigs, stray hairs, and faint hoof impressions. His pulse quickened with excitement. The forest grew denser. The scent of earth and decaying leaves filled the air, and the distant sound of running water reached him. Then he spotted new tracks, larger, deeper, and indicative of a bear. Jack crouched to inspect them, noting their fresh appearance and wandering pattern. Black bears roamed these woods, though encounters were rare. His attention shifted from the deer to the bear as a sudden rustle in the bushes made him freeze. Jack readied his rifle and moved cautiously, his eyes scanning the dense foliage. Through a break in the trees, he spotted the bear about 30 yards away, its massive form partially obscured by bushes. The bear was foraging, its snout buried in the undergrowth. Jack marveled at the sight, but remained alert. Just as he decided to retreat, his foot slipped on a loose stone, creating a sharp noise. The bear's head snapped up, its eyes locking onto Jack. A tense standoff ensued, with Jack hoping the bear would lose interest. However, the bear's nostrils flared, detecting Jack's scent. Its body tensed, muscles rippling, and Jack knew the situation had changed. Bears are unpredictable. Their behavior is governed by instinct and circumstance. Jack understood this all too well, but nothing could have prepared him for what happened next. The bear, perhaps perceiving Jack as a threat to its food, let out a low, rumbling growl that seemed to vibrate through the trees. Jack's heart pounded in his chest as the bear took a step toward him, its posture suddenly aggressive. He knew he had to act fast. Without thinking, Jack began to slowly back away, his rifle now raised slightly, ready to fire if necessary. He didn't want to shoot the bear. It wasn't necessary. If he could create enough distance, the bear might decide he wasn't worth the trouble. But the bear had other ideas. It took another step forward, then another, its growl deepening into a roar that sent birds scattering from the treetops. And then, in an instant, the bear charged. The speed of the attack was startling. One moment, the bear was several yards away. The next, it was thundering toward him, a blur of black fur and fury. Jack barely had time to react. He aimed his rifle, but the bear was too fast. It was on him before he could pull the trigger. The impact was like being hit by a freight train. The force of the bear's charge knocked Jack off his feet, sending him crashing to the ground with a bone-jarring thud. His rifle was torn from his hands, skidding across the dirt out of reach. The bear was on top of him, its powerful claws digging into his flesh, its teeth snapping inches from his face. The world became a blur of pain and chaos as Jack fought to free himself from the bear's relentless assault. Jack's survival instincts kicked in. He twisted and turned, using every ounce of strength he had to fend off the bear's attacks. But the bear was an unstoppable force, its claws ripping through his jacket, tearing into the skin beneath. Jack's vision blurred with the pain, but he forced himself to focus, to think. He knew that if he didn't find a way to escape, the bear would kill him. Somehow, in the chaos, Jack managed to roll onto his side, his hands scrabbling in the dirt for something, anything, that he could use to defend himself. His fingers brushed against a rock, smooth and cool under his touch. Without hesitation, he grabbed it, swinging it with all his might at the bear's head. The rock connected with a sickening thud, and for a split second, the bear recoiled, stunned. It was the opening Jack needed. Ignoring the searing pain in his shoulder, he scrambled to his feet, lunging for his rifle, which lay a few feet away. But the bear recovered quickly. It roared in anger, its eyes wild with fury, and charged again. Jack could feel its hot breath on the back of his neck as he reached for his weapon, his fingers closing around the stock just as the bear's claws raked down his back. He fell to the ground, the rifle in his hands, and rolled onto his back, bringing the weapon up just as the bear lunged at him. There was no time to aim, no time to think. Jack squeezed the trigger. The gunshot echoed through the forest, a loud crack that seemed to hang in the air. The bear flinched, a look of shock in its eyes as the bullet grazed its shoulder. It wasn't a fatal shot, but it was enough to make the bear hesitate, enough to break the momentum of its attack. For a moment, the bear and Jack stared at each other, both panting heavily, both bloodied and exhausted. Then, slowly, the bear began to retreat. It backed away, its eyes never leaving Jack, as if weighing whether to continue the attack. But finally, with a snort of frustration, it turned and lumbered off into the woods, disappearing into the underbrush as quickly as it had appeared. Jack lay on the ground, his chest heaving with each ragged breath. Pain radiated from every part of his body, but he was alive. He had survived. He knew he had to move to get out of the forest and find help before his injuries overwhelmed him. But for a few moments he just lay there, staring up at the canopy of trees above, his mind reeling from the ordeal. The cold dawn light filtered through the tall pines of Banff National Park, casting long shadows over the dense underbrush. The crisp air carried the fresh scent of pine needles and the lingering chill of the night. Levi and Arnold, part of a small group of campers, had risen early, eager for a day of hiking in the Canadian Rockies. After arriving at their campsite the previous evening and enjoying a night of laughter around the fire, they had retired to their tents, lulled by the wilderness sounds. The campsite, nestled in a valley surrounded by towering peaks, offered stunning views and easy access to popular trails. It was a serene spot that promised adventure and a break from daily life. As the sun rose, the campsite was peaceful, with only the rustling of leaves and occasional bird calls breaking the silence. The campers, still groggy, prepared breakfast and discussed their plans for the day. The aroma of coffee and frying bacon mingled with the earthy scent of the forest, creating a tranquil morning. However, amid this calm, a mistake had been made. In their excitement, the group had neglected food storage guidelines. A half-eaten sandwich and snacks were left on a picnic table. They had planned to address it in the morning, but they did not fully grasp the potential consequences of their oversight. The scent of the food drifted through the forest, attracting a grizzly bear, a powerful predator roaming Banff National Park. This grizzly, with a thick brown coat and rippling muscles, was drawn by the promise of an easy meal. Experienced in scavenging human campsites, it was quick to seize opportunities. In the early morning hours, while the campers were still asleep, the grizzly approached the campsite. Moving silently through the forest, the bear's heightened senses guided it toward the source of the enticing aroma. As it emerged from the trees and approached the campsite, its eyes fixed on the unattended food, a primal response ignited. The bear's pace quickened as it crossed the open ground, its breath visible in the cool air. The campers, focused on their morning routines, remained unaware of the approaching danger. It wasn't until one of them stepped out of his tent and spotted the bear that fear jolted through the group. Levi, who the fire pit had crouched, looked up just in time to see the grizzly bear emerge fully into the clearing. His heart skipped a beat, and for a moment he was frozen in place, his mind struggling to process the sight before him. The bear was immense, its size even more imposing up close, and its presence was utterly terrifying. The animal's eyes gleamed with a mix of curiosity and hunger as it sniffed the air, its gaze locking onto the unattended food on the table. Panic began to ripple through the group as the campers realized the gravity of the situation. Arnold, who had been gathering firewood a short distance away, dropped his bundle and rushed back toward the others. He too felt the cold grip of fear as he saw the bear advancing on their campsite. The grizzly, sensing the rising tension, paused for a moment, its ears twitching as it gauged the human's reactions. Levi and Arnold exchanged a glance, their unspoken understanding clear. They needed to scare the bear away. It was a desperate plan, born of the instinct to protect their friends and themselves, but it was also one fraught with danger. They knew the risks of confronting a grizzly, especially one that had already identified a food source. Yet the alternative, doing nothing and allowing the bear to rummage through their campsite, seemed just as dangerous. Levi, summoning all the courage he could muster, grabbed a large branch from the ground. He knew that bears could be intimidated by loud noises and aggressive posturing, but he also knew that it was far from a guaranteed deterrent. Arnold, following Levi's lead, picked up a metal pot and began banging it loudly, hoping to startle the bear into retreat. The grizzly, however, was not easily intimidated. It had encountered humans before and was familiar with their attempts to scare it off. Instead of retreating, the bear let out a deep, resonant growl, a sound that reverberated through the campsite like a thunderclap. The campers froze, their makeshift weapons suddenly feeling woefully inadequate in the face of such raw power. Without warning, the bear charged. The grizzly closed the gap with terrifying speed. Levi, standing closest, barely had time to react before the bear was on him. He swung a branch in a desperate defense, but the bear effortlessly batted it away. The force sent Levi crashing to the ground, pain searing through his chest as the bear's claws raked across him. His vision darkened as the bear loomed overhead. Arnold, seeing Levi's peril, rushed to help, wielding a metal pot. But the bear, fully committed, turned on Arnold with lightning speed. It bit down on his arm, the pain excruciating and fiery. The bear shook Arnold violently, dragging him to the ground. Despite Arnold's desperate kicks and strikes, the bear's immense strength overpowered him. Levi, though badly injured, pushed himself to his knees, his vision blurred. He grabbed a rock and hurled it at the bear. The rock struck the grizzly's face, causing it to release Arnold momentarily. The brief distraction gave Arnold a chance to scramble away, clutching his wounded arm to his chest. Blood oozed from the deep gashes where the bear's teeth had sunk into his flesh, and he could feel the strength draining from his body with each passing second. But the instinct to survive was strong. and he forced himself to keep moving, knowing that to stop would mean certain death. The campers initially panicked, but they regrouped and tried to drive the bear away with noise. They grabbed sticks, rocks, and metal objects, creating a desperate symphony of survival. The grizzly hesitated, disoriented by the commotion. After a bone-chilling roar, it turned and lumbered back into the forest. In the aftermath, Levi lay on the ground, bloodied and gasping, while Arnold, barely conscious, was cradled with a makeshift tourniquet. Shock and horror were evident on the campers' faces. Despite their severe injuries, Levi and Arnold were still alive. The group quickly contacted park rangers and emergency services, who responded swiftly. Within an hour, a helicopter arrived, airlifting Levi and Arnold to the nearest hospital. Tom Sweeney, an avid fisherman, cherished the solitude of Alaska's rivers, where the natural world provided a perfect escape from modern chaos. In late August, during the peak of the salmon run, he had found a secluded spot along a remote riverbank. The river was alive with salmon fighting upstream, and Tom, in his well-worn waders, was immersed in the tranquil rhythm of fishing. The scent of pine and the soft blue sky made for a serene setting. Tom had risen early to secure this prime location. Each cast of his fly rod was precise, and soon he had hooked his first fish of the day. Hours passed in peaceful solitude as the sun rose higher and his creel filled with glistening salmon. Unbeknownst to Tom, a large grizzly bear had been silently observing him. Drawn by the scent of the fish, the powerful apex predator moved stealthily through the forest. Its deep brown fur and muscular frame were almost invisible against the underbrush, and the unfamiliar scent of a human piqued its curiosity. The bear kept its distance at first, evaluating the situation. It was accustomed to catching salmon, but was intrigued by the easy meal that the human seemed to be enjoying. With each step, the bear moved closer to the riverbank, its eyes fixed on Tom with predatory intent. Tom remained oblivious to the danger. Focused on landing a huge salmon, he didn't notice the bear's approach. The river's roar masked the bear's movement, and the grizzly was now just yards away, preparing to strike. Tom's attention was entirely on the fish, unaware of the massive shadow looming behind him. The attack was sudden and violent. The bear charged with astonishing speed, its massive body hurtling through the brush and onto the riverbank. The ground shook beneath its weight as it thundered forward, closing the distance in mere seconds. Tom barely had time to register the blur of motion before the bear was upon him, knocking him off his feet with a force that sent him crashing into the icy waters of the river. Disoriented and shocked, Tom struggled to regain his footing as the cold water closed around him. The world spun in a chaotic swirl of noise and pain, the river rushing in his ears as he tried to comprehend what had just happened. His fishing rod slipped from his grasp, the line trailing uselessly in the current as he flailed, trying to find some purchase on the slick riverbed. But the bear was relentless, its massive paws swiping at him with deadly precision. Tom's survival instincts kicked in. He knew that to survive a grizzly bear attack, one had to fight back to make oneself appear as large and threatening as possible. But in the water, disoriented and panicked, such logic was hard to grasp. He reached for his knife, fumbling with numb fingers as the bear's claws raked across his back, tearing through the thick fabric of his jacket. The pain was excruciating, a white-hot fire that seared through his nerves and sent shockwaves of terror coursing through his body. Finally, he managed to free the knife from its sheath, gripping it tightly as he tried to turn and face his attacker. The bear loomed over him, its maw open wide to reveal rows of sharp teeth, its breath hot and rank against his face. Tom slashed at the bear with all the strength he could muster, the blade finding its mark in the thick fur, but the bear was unfazed, its primal rage overriding any sense of pain or injury. With a powerful swipe of its paw, the bear knocked the knife from Tom's hand, sending it spinning into the river. Tom was defenseless now, reduced to little more than helpless prey in the face of the bear's fury. He struggled to escape, kicking and thrashing in the water, but the bear was too strong, too determined. It reared back on its hind legs before coming down with crushing force, its jaws closing around Tom's neck in a death grip. The world around Tom seemed to slow to a crawl, the sounds of the river fading into a distant hum. His vision darkened, the edges of his consciousness slipping away as the bear's teeth sank deeper into his flesh. There was no escaping the inevitable now, no hope of rescue or salvation. The bear's primal strength overwhelmed him completely, its massive body pinning him to the riverbed as it delivered the fatal bite. Tom's body went limp. The fight drained from him as life ebbed away. The bear, satisfied with its kill, dragged his lifeless form from the river and into the forest. The once peaceful riverbank was now a scene of violence and death, the water stained with Tom's blood as it rushed downstream. The bear, driven by its hunger, tore into Tom's flesh, feeding on the body with a savage intensity that only the wilderness could foster. Hours passed, and the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows over the river. The bear, having satisfied its hunger, left the remains of Tom's body deep within the forest, hidden from sight. The wilderness reclaimed the scene, the sounds of the river and the wind through the trees returning to their natural rhythm. But the violence of the attack lingered, a stark reminder of the brutal reality that lurked beneath the surface of Alaska's pristine beauty. When Tom Sweeney failed to return as expected, his family grew alarmed. Known for his punctuality and routine, Tom's disappearance was out of character. As hours passed and night fell, anxiety turned into fear. By morning, they reported him missing, triggering a search and rescue operation in the remote wilderness where he had last been seen. Search teams scoured the dense forest and rugged terrain, with helicopters overhead and search dogs on the ground. Despite their efforts, days passed with no sign of Tom, dimming hopes of finding him alive. The breakthrough came at the riverbank, where they discovered bloodstains, torn clothing, and grizzly bear tracks. Following the trail into the forest, they found Tom's remains. The evidence of the bear's brutal attack was clear, leaving behind a scene of devastation. The news of Tom's death shocked his family and community. A cherished figure, Tom's loss was profound and served as a stark reminder of the dangers of Alaska's wild landscape, where the beauty of nature is coupled with its inherent risks. The mother bear, sensing a threat to her cubs, had already made up her mind. With a roar that echoed through the forest, she charged. Donna's training kicked in. She aimed the bear spray and released a cloud of the potent deterrent. The bear hesitated momentarily, shaking its head, but the fury and protectiveness drove it forward, mainly because it didn't hit her well. Donna continued to back away, trying to maintain her composure, but the terrain was uneven. She stumbled and fell, the bear spray slipping from her grasp. The grizzly was upon her in seconds. Donna tried to shield herself, using her arms to protect her head and neck, but the bear's strength was overwhelming. Powerful claws tore at her clothing and flesh, and she felt the searing pain of its bites. She screamed, hoping to scare the bear off, but it was relentless, driven by an instinct to protect its young. In the chaos, Donna managed to activate her emergency beacon. The device sent a distress signal to the park rangers, who were always on high alert for such emergencies. As minutes felt like hours, Donna's world became a blur of pain and fear. She tried to stay conscious, focusing on the thought of her loved ones and the determination that had brought her here. The park rangers received the signal and sprang into action. They had a team trained for rapid response to wildlife encounters, equipped with vehicles and tranquilizers to deal with aggressive animals. The rangers raced against time, navigating the rough terrain as quickly as possible. When they arrived at the scene, the bear was still attacking Donna. The rangers used loud noises and non-lethal rounds to drive the bear away, ensuring it would retreat without further provocation. Once the bear had disappeared into the forest, they rushed to Donna's side. She was in a critical state, with severe injuries that required immediate medical attention. A helicopter was called in for airlift, and Donna was transported to the nearest hospital. The medical team worked tirelessly to stabilize her, addressing multiple lacerations, broken bones, and significant blood loss. The first few days were touch and go, with Donna fighting for her life. Her family and friends were notified, and their worst fears were realized as they waited anxiously for updates. Donna's survival was nothing short of miraculous. Her physical condition, though unconventional for a hiker, had contributed to her endurance. She had a strong heart and an indomitable will, which played a crucial role in her recovery. The medical team was amazed by her resilience, and her story quickly spread through the park and beyond. As Donna began her long journey to recovery, the incident sparked a renewed focus on bear safety measures for park visitors. Yellowstone National Park officials reviewed their guidelines and educational programs. emphasizing the importance of caution and preparation when hiking in bear country. They introduced more comprehensive training sessions, ensuring that all visitors understood the risks and knew how to use bear spray effectively. The park also increased the number of rangers on patrol, especially in areas known for high bear activity. They worked on developing better tracking systems for wildlife, aiming to provide hikers with real-time updates about bear movements. The incident with Donna Mitchell became a case study, a powerful reminder of the unpredictable nature of wildlife and the importance of respecting their habitats. Jane Waters always had a profound connection with nature, an affinity that led her to become one of the most renowned wildlife photographers of her generation. Her life was a montage of adventures and expeditions, each trip bringing her closer to the raw beauty of the natural world. Tasmania had always been on her list, a remote wilderness teeming with unique fauna, some of which couldn't be found anywhere else on the planet. Jane had meticulously planned her trip. She wanted to capture the island's elusive creatures, the ones that had rarely been seen through a camera lens. Her itinerary included the rugged terrains of the Tasmanian wilderness, the lush temperate rainforests, and the open plains that stretched into the horizon. Her excitement was palpable as she boarded the small aircraft that would take her from mainland Australia to Tasmania. The island was everything she had imagined and more. The forests were thick with ancient trees, their canopies creating a mosaic of shadows and light on the forest floor. Jane's base camp was set up in a remote area near the Tarkine rainforest, one of the most biodiverse regions in Tasmania. From here, she ventured into the wilderness each day, her camera always at the ready. Her days were filled with moments of awe and wonder as she captured the island's unique wildlife. She photographed the swift and elusive Tasmanian devils, their fiery eyes glinting in the twilight. It was during one of these quiet mornings, as Jane lay hidden among the underbrush, that the serenity of the forest was shattered. She was entirely focused on a wombat family, adjusting her lens to capture the playful antics of the young ones, when a sudden rustling sound caught her attention. She glanced up, her heart skipping a beat as she saw a large shadow moving through the trees. It was a bear, a creature not native to Tasmania and certainly out of its usual territory. Jane's mind raced. How had it ended up here? The bear was agitated, its movements erratic as it wandered through the unfamiliar terrain. Jane's instincts kicked in. She knew that bears could be unpredictable, especially when startled. She remained as still as possible, hoping the bear would pass without noticing her. But fate was not on her side that day. A sudden breeze carried her scent towards the bear, and it turned its head sharply in her direction. Their eyes met, and in that instant Jane knew she was in grave danger. The bear, sensing an intruder in its already confusing environment, reacted defensively. It charged towards her, a terrifying sight that sent a jolt of adrenaline through her body. Jane's mind raced, her training and experience battling with the sheer terror of the moment. She grabbed her camera, the heaviest piece of equipment she had, and held it out in front of her, hoping to use it as a shield. The bear was upon her in seconds, its massive paws swiping at her with a force that knocked her off her feet. Jane felt a searing pain as the bear's claws raked across her body, but she fought to stay conscious. She used her camera to fend off the bear as best as she could. Each swipe of its claws met with a desperate block. Her body screamed in agony, but she knew she couldn't give up. Her survival instincts took over, and every movement was a testament to her will to live. In the midst of the chaos, Jane remembered the emergency flare she carried in her backpack. It was her last resort, a signal for help that she hoped would reach someone in this remote wilderness. With trembling hands, she fumbled for the flare, pulling it from her pack and igniting it. The bright light and sudden burst of smoke startled the bear, causing it to pause its attack momentarily. The flare's light cut through the forest, a beacon of distress that could be seen from miles away. As the bear hesitated, Jane prayed that someone would see her signal. Her body was weakening, the pain threatening to overwhelm her, but she couldn't give up now. The bear, confused and agitated, roared in frustration, but the flare had done its job. The bright light and smoke had brought her precious moments. Miles away, a group of hikers was making their way through the forest. They had been exploring the Tasmanian wilderness, drawn by the promise of adventure and the island's natural beauty. One of the hikers, a seasoned mountaineer named Tom, spotted the flare. He knew it was a distress signal and immediately alerted his companions. Without hesitation, they changed their course. making their way towards the source of the flare as quickly as possible. Jane's vision was beginning to blur, her body succumbing to the pain and blood loss. She clung to consciousness, willing herself to stay awake. The sound of footsteps reached her ears, growing louder as the hiking group approached. When they burst through the underbrush and saw the scene before them, they wasted no time. Tom and another hiker, a former paramedic, rushed to Jane's side while the others worked to scare off the bear. Tom used his hiking poles and loud shouts to intimidate the bear, making himself appear larger and more threatening. The bear, already disoriented by the flare, backed away, growling in frustration before finally retreating into the forest. With the immediate danger gone, the hikers turned their full attention to Jane. The former paramedic assessed her injuries quickly, recognizing the severity of her condition. They needed to get her to a hospital fast. They fashioned a makeshift stretcher from their gear, carefully lifting Jane onto it. The hike back to their base camp was grueling, every step filled with urgency and fear for Jane's life. At the base camp, they had a satellite phone, their lifeline to the outside world. They called for emergency medical assistance, providing their coordinates and details of the attack. An air ambulance was dispatched, cutting through the skies towards their location. As they waited, the hikers did everything they could to keep Jane stable, talking to her, holding her conscious, and administering first aid. The medical team arrived swiftly, taking over from the hikers and providing advanced care. Jane was airlifted to the nearest hospital, her journey a blur of pain and fleeting moments of clarity. In the hospital, Jane underwent several surgeries to treat her injuries. The doctors and nurses worked tirelessly, and their expertise and dedication gave her the best chance at recovery. Jane's will to survive, the same determination that had driven her to explore the wilds of Tasmania, saw her through the darkest hours. Her recovery was long and arduous, filled with physical therapy and moments of doubt, but she never lost her resolve. Dr. Emily Harris was a dedicated biologist whose passion for understanding the natural world led her to focus her research on bear behavior and habitat. The Canadian Rockies, with their vast expanse of untouched wilderness, offered a perfect setting for her studies. For months, Emily had been living in a small cabin near the base of the mountains, venturing out daily to collect data and observe the local bear population. Her days were long and filled with meticulous note-taking, setting up camera traps and tracking bear movements through the dense forest. Emily was well versed in the habits and behaviors of these majestic creatures. She had spent years studying them, learning to respect their space and understand their signals. On a warm afternoon in late summer, Emily set out with her backpack loaded with equipment. Her destination was a meadow she had recently discovered, a prime spot where bears often foraged for food. The meadow was nestled in a valley surrounded by towering peaks, a hidden gem that provided ample food sources for the bears. Emily had already set up several camera traps in the area and was eager to check the footage. As she approached the meadow, she moved quietly, her eyes scanning for any signs of recent bear activity. As she moved further into the meadow, she came across a patch of disturbed earth. The soil was freshly turned, and there were clear signs of digging. Emily knelt to inspect the area, noting the size and depth of the holes. Bears often dug for roots and insects, and this spot is a recent feeding site. She pulled out her field notebook and began to document her findings, her mind focused on the task at hand. Suddenly, a sound caught her attention, a low, rumbling growl. Emily froze, her heart pounding in her chest. She slowly turned her head, scanning the area for the source of the noise. About 50 yards away, partially hidden by the underbrush, she saw a large bear. It was a magnificent animal. Its fur was rich brown, and its eyes were dark and intense. The bear was clearly agitated, its body tense and its gaze fixed on her. Emily's extensive knowledge of bear behavior flooded her mind. She knew that the bear was likely foraging for food and had perceived her presence as a threat. Her training had taught her to remain calm and avoid sudden movements, so she slowly began to back away, maintaining eye contact with the bear. She hoped that by giving the bear space, it would lose interest and move on. However, the bear did not retreat. Instead, it took a step forward, its growl growing louder and more menacing. Emily's heart raced as she realized that the situation was escalating. She continued to back away, her mind racing through the options. She had bear spray in her backpack, but it was out of reach, and she knew that any sudden movements could provoke the bear further. The bear's posture shifted, its body lowering as it prepared to charge. Emily's instincts kicked in, and she turned to run. She sprinted through the meadow, her breath coming in ragged gasps as she pushed herself to move faster. Behind her, she heard the thunderous sound of the bear crashing through the underbrush, its powerful body gaining on her. Emily's mind was a blur of fear and determination. She knew that reaching her research vehicle was her only chance of survival. The terrain was rough and she stumbled several times, but she forced herself to keep going. Her legs burned with the effort, and her lungs screamed for air, but she couldn't stop. The sound of the bear's pursuit was a constant, terrifying presence. As she neared the edge of the meadow, Emily felt a searing pain in her leg. The bear had caught up to her, its massive paw striking her with incredible force. She fell to the ground, the impact knocking the wind out of her. Desperation surged through her as she struggled to get up. The bear was upon her, its mighty jaws snapping dangerously close to her face. Emily used every ounce of strength she had to fight back. She kicked and flailed, trying to protect her vital areas. The bear's claws raked across her body, tearing through her clothes and skin. The pain was excruciating, but she couldn't afford to give in to it. She reached for her backpack, managing to grab the bear spray. With a trembling hand, she aimed it at the bear and released a burst of the repellent. The bear recoiled, momentarily disoriented by the spray. Emily seized the opportunity to scramble to her feet and continue her desperate run. Blood streamed from her wounds, and every step sent waves of agony through her body. She could see her research vehicle in the distance, a beacon of hope amidst the chaos. The vehicle was parked at the edge of the forest, just a few hundred yards away. Emily's vision blurred with pain and exhaustion, but she forced herself to keep moving. The bear, still dazed by the spray, was slower to resume its chase, giving her a precious few seconds to widen the gap. Reaching the vehicle, Emily fumbled with the keys, her hands shaking uncontrollably. She managed to unlock the door and collapsed into the driver's seat. She slammed the door shut just as the bear reached the vehicle, its massive body colliding with the side. With the bear still clawing at the vehicle, Emily floored the accelerator. The tires spun on the loose gravel before gaining traction, and the car surged forward. She drove as fast as she could, her vision narrowing to the road ahead. The bear gave chase for a short distance before eventually giving up and disappearing into the forest. Emily didn't stop driving until she reached the nearest ranger station. Her body was a patchwork of wounds, her clothes soaked with blood. She honked the horn repeatedly, collapsing against the steering wheel as the rangers rushed out to help her. They quickly assessed her injuries and called for an emergency medical evacuation. As Emily was airlifted to the nearest hospital, her mind drifted in and out of consciousness. The pain was overwhelming, but she felt a deep sense of gratitude for having survived. Her encounter with the bear was a reminder of the dangers faced by wildlife researchers, even those with extensive knowledge and experience. The story of Emily's attack spread quickly, drawing attention to the risks inherent in field research. Her colleagues and fellow researchers rallied around her, advocating for improved safety measures and training for those working in close proximity to wildlife. It was August 12, 2024, and a group of 10 people, tourists and locals alike, gathered outside in the remote settlement of Longyearbyen, Svalbard, Norway, to enjoy the breathtaking Arctic landscape. Out of the 10 people, 4 were tourists. They had chosen to visit the remote settlement, drawn by the allure of the midnight sun and the unique beauty of the polar environment. The other people, 5 locals, not only found solace in the stark, icy wilderness surrounding their small community, but they also loved to share the land's beauty with outsiders. But what was supposed to be a moment of quiet joy and wonder turned into a living nightmare. Longyearbyen, a settlement of around 2,500 residents, is the world's northernmost town. The town is located in the Svalbard archipelago, just over 800 miles from the North Pole. It's a place where nature reigns supreme, its raw power completely untouched by humans. Its towering mountains, endless glaciers, and the ever-present danger of polar bears attract the bravest souls from all over the world. This particular group of tourists was no different. They were all thrill-seekers who had explored the most secluded corners of the earth, and Longyearbyen had long been on their bucket lists. The group had ventured out that evening to experience the Arctic twilight. The sun was casting a surreal golden glow across the icy landscape. It was a beautiful sight, but also one that made the group realize just how secluded the place was. They were just a short distance from the town's outskirts, but even the safety of the buildings couldn't compete with the untamed wilderness. All 9 members of the group were armed with cameras, binoculars, and a sense of adventure, eager to explore the otherworldly beauty of the Arctic. They were blissfully unaware of the immense danger lurking in the shadows. A large and starving polar bear had been stalking the area for days. The lack of natural prey in the region had driven the bear further from the ice and its natural habitat, and closer to human settlements in search of food. The bear's natural habitat has taken a huge hit in recent years due to the abrupt effects of climate change. The sea ice that once provided a hunting ground for seals, the bear's primary prey, had been receding at an alarming rate, forcing the bears to venture further inland where food was scarce. And if seals were no longer an option, humans would have to suffice. This particular bear, a large male, had been spotted near Longyearbyen before, but it had always kept its distance. This time, however, its hunger was bottomless. It had made the bear more aggressive, more willing to take risks. The bear was dangerously thin, its ribs visible beneath its fur, and its eyes had the wild, desperate look of an animal that had been driven to the brink. The group had just finished taking photos of the landscape when one of the locals, a hunter named Eric, noticed something moving in the distance. Eric didn't want to alarm the others and waited to be sure of what he was seeing. At first, he thought it was just a trick of the light or a shadow cast by the setting sun. But then the shape grew closer and larger. It was then that, to his horror, Eric realized that it was a polar bear, and it was heading straight for them. The hunter shouted a warning, but the others were too mesmerized by the landscape to notice the approaching danger. It was as if they were under a spell. In an instant, before anyone could react, the bear was upon them. It moved with terrifying speed, driven by nothing but hunger. The first to fall was a young tourist named Jane, who had been standing closest to the bear. Jane didn't even get the chance to scream before the bear's massive paw struck her, sending her sprawling to the ground. The bear was on her in an instant, its powerful jaws closing around her neck. The others could only watch in horror as Jane's body went limp within mere seconds. The bear's next victim was a local man named Lars. When the bear turned its attention to Lars, the man tried to run, but the animal was too fast. It caught up to him in seconds, knocking him to the ground. Lars, in his desperation to survive, tried to fight back, but again it was no use. The bear's jaws closed around Lars's head, and with a sickening crunch, it ended his life. Panic set in as the group realized the full extent of the danger they were in. They scattered in all directions, hoping to escape the attack, but the animal was crazed. It was a killing machine driven by a primal need to survive, and it showed no mercy. It caught up to the third victim, a middle-aged tourist named Robert, as he scrambled desperately to climb a nearby hill. Just when Robert thought he made it, the bear dragged him back down, tearing into him with its claws and teeth. His screams echoed across the barren landscape, but there was no one around to hear them, no one to help. Once the bear left Robert lifeless, it turned its attention to a local woman named Ingrid. Ingrid had been running towards the town in a desperate bid to reach safety. She thought she had a chance. She thought she made it, but the bear overtook her just as she reached the edge of a snowbank. Ingrid tripped and fell, and before she could get up, the bear was on her. It tore into her with a ferocity that left no doubt that it was fighting for its life as much as she was for hers. The fifth and sixth victims were a young couple in their early 20s, Mark and Emma, who had come to Svalbard on their honeymoon. They had been taking photos of each other when the attack began, and now they were running for their lives. They held hands as they ran, but this just slowed them down. The polar bear was faster. It caught up to them near a small cluster of rocks. Mark tried to shield Emma with his body, but the young man was no match for this terrifying force of nature. It tore them apart, leaving their bodies broken and bloodied in the snow. The seventh and final victim was a local guide named Henrik, who had been leading the group, meaning to give them the best possible experience. When the attack began, Henrik fired a flare gun at the bear, hoping to scare it off, but the bear was beyond fear. Henrik was the last to fall, fighting with everything he had to protect the others. Sadly, his efforts weren't enough. The animal charged at him, swatting the flare gun out of his hands and knocking him to the ground. Henrik tried to crawl away, but the bear grabbed him by the leg and dragged him back. It was over in seconds, but for those who witnessed it, it felt like an eternity. The three remaining survivors, Eric, Kate, and Mike, were in a state of shock, They had watched their friends and loved ones die in the most brutal way imaginable, and they were powerless to stop it. And now it looked like it was their turn to suffer a terrible death. Covered in blood, they huddled together, too terrified to move, too shocked to fully understand what had just happened. But the bear's attack was over. It paid the 3 survivors no mind as it started eating one of the lifeless bodies. With the bear now distracted, Eric, Kate, and Mike managed to escape. They ran as fast as they could to their lodge. Once inside, they started crying and alerted the authorities. It wasn't long before the authorities arrived, and they responded with swift and deadly force. By the time they arrived, the bear had left, dragging one of the bodies with it. A team of armed men and women tracked the bear to a nearby ridge where it had taken refuge. The bear charged at them as they approached, but this time it met its match. The animal was killed. The threat was over, but the damage had been done. The survivors were left to come to terms with the trauma of what they had witnessed. For the rest of the world, the attack was a reminder of the growing dangers posed by climate change. Fog thickly blanketed the Alaskan village, muting sound and blurring the landscape. This small indigenous settlement, once ruled by ice, faced change as warming temperatures melted the sea ice. Yet today, the villagers gathered for a seasonal celebration, a brief moment of joy amid survival challenges. Families mingled, children played, and elders reflected quietly. The scent of food filled the cold air, symbolizing unity and tradition as they came together to honor their heritage and support one another in the shifting Arctic environment. Unbeknownst to them, something far more dangerous than any blizzard lurked beyond the edge of the fog. The polar bear, driven south by starvation, wandered in an increasingly unfamiliar environment. The sea ice, once the foundation of its hunting grounds, was disappearing, forcing it into closer proximity to human settlements. This particular bear had been stalking the periphery of the village for days, gaunt and desperate, its immense body weakened by hunger. It had smelled the food, sensed the warmth of life, and instinctively followed the scent through the fog. The bear's body was an embodiment of power, but power was diminished by need. Once thick and white, its fur clung to a skeletal frame, ribs visible beneath the matted fur. Yellowed eyes, filled with hunger and desperation, scanned the village from the shadows. The fog concealed its approach, as silent as the snow underfoot. It moved with a terrifying grace, its massive paws padding lightly as it neared the heart of the village. Suddenly, there was a shift. The bear stepped into the open, emerging from the mist like a phantom. At first, no one noticed. The gathering continued as children laughed and adults chatted. But then a gasp cut through the fog, and eyes turned toward the pale, hulking figure standing at the edge of the gathering. For a brief, surreal moment, the village was frozen, locked in a collective state of disbelief. It wasn't unusual to see polar bears in the Arctic, but never this close, never like this. The bear moved. It charged without warning, driven by an instinctual hunger that overpowered all caution. Its speed was shocking, belying its size and weakened condition. In an instant, the peaceful gathering turned into chaos. Screams erupted as the massive predator barreled forward, its powerful limbs propelling it toward the nearest group of villagers. A child, no older than 6, was caught in the bear's path. The predator's jaws, lined with dagger-like teeth, clamped down on the child's small frame with a sickening crunch. Blood sprayed across the snow, staining the pure white landscape a gruesome red. The bear's attack was swift and ruthless. It flung the child's lifeless body aside as if it weighed nothing and moved on to the next victim. Panic spread through the crowd like wildfire. People scrambled in all directions, some toward their homes, others trying in vain to help those already in the bear's path. Elders, their movements slowed by age, became easy targets. One of the village elders, a respected woman known for her wisdom, was caught off guard as she tried to shield a younger family member. The bear's massive paw swiped across her body, claws raking through her flesh as if she were made of paper. She collapsed in a heap, her body twisted and broken, lifeblood soaking into the ground beneath her. Another villager, a man in his 30s, grabbed a shovel from a nearby stack of tools. His face was etched with fear and determination as he ran toward the bear, swinging the makeshift weapon with all his strength. The shovel connected with the bear's side, but the impact was nothing more than a glancing blow. Enraged, the bear turned on him, its maw open wide. The man barely had time to react before the bear's jaws closed around his leg. It pulled him down, ripping into his flesh with savage efficiency. His screams echoed in the air, cut short by the bear's relentless mauling. In just 2 minutes, the polar bear had already claimed multiple lives, and the carnage was far from over. It moved with terrifying speed from one target to the next, its primal instincts honed from a life of survival in one of the harshest environments on Earth. Even weakened by hunger, its sheer strength was overwhelming. The bear swiped at another villager, tearing through clothing and flesh as it sent the man flying backward, landing in a crumpled heap. A group of villagers, in a desperate bid to defend their community, gathered whatever they could find, shovels, hammers, even kitchen knives, and charged at the bear. Their fear was palpable, but so was their determination. The bear met them with equal ferocity. It reared up on its hind legs, towering over them, a giant of muscle and bone. One villager stabbed at its belly with a knife, but the blade barely penetrated the thick fur and skin. The bear roared in fury and brought its total weight down on him, crushing his body beneath its bulk. Those who remained tried to flee. Parents scooped up their children, running toward the safety of their homes, but the bear was relentless. It charged at another group, its jaws snapping at anything that moved. A young girl, separated from her family in the chaos, found herself in the bear's direct path. She tried to run, but the bear's claws caught her leg, dragging her down into the snow. Her cries were lost amidst the frenzy as the bear tore into her. As the attack raged on, the village's isolation became painfully evident. No emergency services were close enough to respond in time. The nearest outpost was hours away by helicopter, and even that would be delayed by the fog and weather conditions. The villagers were alone, left to face the beast with nothing but their own courage and meager tools. Minutes passed, though it felt like hours. Eventually, through a combination of sheer willpower and luck, the remaining villagers managed to drive the bear back. Several men, wielding axes and other tools, landed blows that slowed the bear down. Bloodied and exhausted, the bear finally retreated into the fog, limping and growling, but it had already left its mark on the village. The aftermath was harrowing. Bodies lay strewn across the snow, their blood staining the earth. The survivors, trembling and in shock, surveyed the carnage. 9 people had been killed, including children and elders, their lives snuffed out in the blink of an eye. The village, once a place of tight-knit community and tradition, was now a scene of unspeakable horror. The Anderson family had eagerly anticipated their mountain getaway, hoping to escape their hectic lives and reconnect with nature. John and Lisa, along with their children, Noah, 14, and Emily, 10, rented a secluded cabin deep in the wilderness. Nestled among towering pines and overlooking a pristine lake, it offered a perfect retreat. The remoteness provided a welcome change from city life. No cell service, no distractions, just the sounds of nature. The first few days unfolded beautifully. Long hikes, marshmallow roasting, and nights spent under a starlit sky. But on the third night, a strange stillness fell over the forest. John sensed something was off as they retreated into the cabin after an evening by the fire. The usual sounds of the woods faded, creating an unsettling silence. Though rustic, the cabin felt sturdy, constructed from thick logs and heavy beams, yet they hadn't fully prepared for the local black bears, notorious for scavenging human food. The park ranger had warned them, but John was confident they had secured their supplies. As the family settled into bed, a massive male bear began to circle the cabin, drawn in by the scent of their food. The faint scratching at the door went unnoticed until it intensified into a loud pounding. John jolted awake around midnight, initially dismissing it as a tree branch. But as the thuds grew louder, dread filled him. He jumped from the bed, heart racing, while Lisa stirred beside him, sensing his alarm. Cracking the door open, John was met with the unmistakable sound of claws scraping against wood and a massive shadow outside. The bear was at the front door, battering against it with powerful limbs. Panic surged as John realized they were trapped inside. The cabin was sturdy but not impenetrable. If the bear broke through, there would be no stopping it. He turned to Lisa, now fully awake, her eyes wide with fear. The kids were in the other room, vulnerable and unaware of the looming danger. Time was running out, and the bear was determined to get in. A loud crack echoed through the cabin as the doorframe splintered. The bear, driven by hunger and the scent of food, broke through with alarming speed. Its head and massive shoulders squeezed through the opening, and in the dim light of the cabin, its dark eyes gleamed with determination. John's instincts kicked in. He needed to reach the children. But the bear was now entirely inside the main room, and the lumbering animal blocked the hallway leading to the kids' bedroom. Lisa grabbed his arm, her face pale. He could feel her trembling. The bear began sniffing the air, drawn toward the kitchen where the family's food was stored. For a brief moment, it seemed to be the scent of food, which allowed John and Lisa time to think. But the car keys were in the kitchen, hanging on a hook just above the counter where they'd left a loaf of bread out earlier. Their only chance of escape was getting those keys and making it to the car, parked just outside. They were pinned. With the bear's bulk blocking the main room, John motioned for Lisa to stay put, as he frantically scanned the room for something, anything that could help them. His eyes landed on an old hunting rifle mounted on the wall. He darted across the room, but as he grabbed the gun, his stomach sank. No ammunition. The bear, having torn into a cabinet, sent pans crashing to the floor. It growled a low, deep sound that rattled the walls. Noah and Emily's room was on the opposite side of the cabin, and they were still trapped inside. John knew that if the bear became too aggressive, it could easily tear through the doors to reach them. He edged closer to the hallway, trying to remain out of the bear's line of sight. The animal was preoccupied with its focus on rummaging through the kitchen, but any sudden movement or sound could draw its attention. He made it halfway down the hall when the bear suddenly jerked its head up, its sharp ears picking up on the creaking of the floorboards. It sniffed the air again, turning toward the hallway. John froze, every muscle in his body tense. The bear moved slowly in his direction, its heavy steps echoing off the wooden floor. Lisa, still near the bedroom, looked on helplessly. The bear's massive body shifted its attention entirely toward John now. With no place to run, John backed toward the kids' room, hoping to shield them from the impending danger. In a split-second decision, John flung a chair across the room, hoping to divert the bear's attention. The chair crashed against the wall, causing the bear to snarl and charge toward the noise. It swiped at the air, its powerful claws tearing through the fabric of the furniture. In the chaos, John managed to reach Noah and Emily's room. He shoved the door open, pulling the kids from their beds. They were groggy, but quickly understood the severity of the situation. With the bear still distracted in the main room, John motioned for them to be silent. There was no time to think about a complete escape plan, only survival. Lisa, seizing the moment, grabbed the car keys while the bear tore through the remnants of the kitchen. With John leading the kids and Lisa trailing closely behind, they moved as quietly as possible through the back hallway toward the side door. Suddenly, the bear let out an ear-splitting roar. It had realized its human prey was trying to escape. It charged toward them, its claws scraping the floorboards, tearing through the house in a frantic rush. John shoved the side door open just in time. They all stumbled out into the cold night air, sprinting toward the car parked just a few feet away. The bear slammed into the door frame behind them, but by then, they were already inside the car. Lisa jammed the keys into the ignition, hands shaking uncontrollably as she started the engine. With a roar of the engine, they sped down the dirt road, leaving the cabin and the enraged bear behind in the darkness. As the cabin disappeared in the rearview mirror, they knew that they had narrowly escaped a brutal encounter, but the image of the bear breaking into their peaceful sanctuary would haunt them long after the mountain retreat was over. Dr. Elena Rossi stood at the edge of the dense spruce forest, her breath steady but her heart racing. As a wildlife biologist with over a decade of experience studying bears, she was well acquainted with the challenges of the wilderness. Today, however, was different. Reports of an orphaned bear cub wandering near her research station had reached her, and the urgency to act was palpable. If she didn't intervene quickly, the cub would face starvation or predators. Equipped with her tranquilizer rifle and her expertise, Elena set off, her boots crunching on the forest floor as she searched for any signs of the cub. This area was known territory for a local mother bear and her offspring, but there was no sign of them. Time was critical, and the cub was alone and vulnerable. As she navigated the underbrush, the forest hummed with life. Birds chirped overhead and leaves rustled in the breeze. Then, through a break in the trees, she spotted it. The small cub lay curled near a fallen tree, weak and exposed. Its coat, typically thick and glossy, was matted, and it barely lifted its head as she approached. Elena's heart ached. This was the moment she had trained for countless times, yet it never got easier. Slowly kneeling, she readied her tranquilizer gun, intent on sedating the cub and bringing it back for care. Her movements were calm and precise as she adjusted the dart for the cub's small size, but just as she was about to aim, a deep, guttural growl echoed through the clearing. Every instinct in her body screamed danger. Elena froze, her heart racing. The growl intensified and her blood ran cold as she turned her head. Emerging from the underbrush was the mother bear, massive and imposing, her dark fur gleaming in the sunlight. The bear sniffed the air, her dark eyes locking onto Elena and the cub. Elena's mind raced. The mother had been out of sight, likely foraging or patrolling her territory. But now, she saw Elena as a threat to her young. In an instant, the bear lunged forward with a deafening roar that shook the forest. Elena dropped the tranquilizer gun and scrambled backward, adrenaline surging. She recognized this wasn't a warning, it was a full-blown attack. The bear believed her cub was in danger. With no time to think, Elena threw herself to the side, narrowly avoiding a massive paw that swiped where she had just been. The bear was relentless. Panic surged in her, but she had to stay focused. She needed to create distance. Darting toward a cluster of trees, she relied on her understanding of bear behavior to navigate the terrain. Bears, though bulky, could sprint with surprising speed. The ground shook as the bear charged after her, its fury palpable. Elena's legs burned as she ran, branches whipping against her face and arms. She ducked behind a tree, hoping to buy herself some time. The bear skidded to a halt, sniffing the air, clearly agitated. Elena's heart raced as she formulated a plan. She needed to reach her research station, where safety awaited. But with the bear in pursuit, she had to act quickly. But then she tripped. Her foot caught on a root, sending her sprawling to the ground. The impact knocked the wind out of her, but there was no time to recover. The bear was upon her, and Elena barely rolled out of the way as the bear struck, her claws tearing into the ground where Elena had been. Elena gasped in pain as she felt the bear's claws rake across her leg. White-hot agony shot through her body. She bit back a scream, knowing that any noise might further provoke the bear. Blood soaked her pants, but she couldn't stop now. Every second counted. The bear, enraged, reared up on her hind legs, towering over Elena. For a split second, Elena stared up at the beast, knowing how close she was to death. She managed to scramble to her feet, clutching her bleeding leg. With every ounce of strength she had left, she stumbled toward the nearest large tree. She had to put something solid between her and the bear. She could feel the animal's hot breath on her back as she threw herself behind the tree trunk, just as the bear slammed into it with a thunderous roar. The impact shook the tree, but it held. For a moment, there was a brief respite. Elena clung to the trunk, gasping for air, blood still pouring from her leg. The bear circled the tree, growling, her claws scraping the bark. Elena knew this wasn't over. The bear was determined, and with no other prey in sight, she wasn't going to leave until Elena was dealt with. With no time to waste, Elena knew she had to retreat to the safety of her research station. Her supplies were limited, and the radio had been damaged in a storm the week before. But it was her only hope. She hobbled as fast as she could, moving through the forest, her vision blurring from the pain and the loss of blood. The bear followed relentlessly, crashing through the undergrowth with terrifying speed. Elena's mind raced. She had to think like a bear, use her knowledge to survive. She angled her path toward the steep ravine that bordered the station, knowing the bear wouldn't follow down such a hazardous drop. As she neared the edge, the sound of the bear's growls grew louder and closer. Finally, she reached the ravine, adrenaline coursing through her veins. She half slid, half fell down the steep incline, wincing as the jagged rocks tore at her skin. The bear stopped at the top, pacing back and forth, growling in frustration but unwilling to follow her down the treacherous path. Elena collapsed at the bottom, her body trembling from shock and exhaustion. She had made it, barely, but the bear wasn't leaving. She watched as it paced along the ridge, still furious, unwilling to abandon its cub, which it still thought was in danger. For hours, Elena remained trapped at the bottom of the ravine, too injured to move, with the bear still nearby. She needed to get back to the station, but with her radio damaged and limited supplies, her options were grim. Her only hope was to wait, to allow time for the bear to calm down, and then find a way to reunite the cub with its mother. Elena had always known the risks of working with wildlife, but now Bleeding and stranded in the wild, she had to use every bit of her knowledge to survive this ordeal. It was a battle between instinct and understanding, and Elena, in her weakened state, knew she was at the mercy of nature. As the sun began its descent on July 8, 2024, the Komarov family ventured into the heart of the Siberian wilderness. The day was warm, and the forest teemed with the hum of insects and the rustle of leaves stirred by a gentle breeze. For Igor Komarov and his family, this trip was an escape from their hectic lives, a chance to reconnect with nature. Igor, a sturdy man in his late 40s with rugged strength, had long dreamed of showing his children the untouched beauty of Russia's wilds. His wife Alina, a quiet but resilient schoolteacher, shared his enthusiasm. Their children, 12-year-old Victor and 10-year-old Anya, were brimming with curiosity and excitement for the adventure. The journey to their campsite had been long and arduous, involving treks through dense forest and across winding rivers. They finally arrived at a secluded clearing surrounded by towering pines, offering a breathtaking view of distant mountains. There were no signs of civilization, just the Komarovs and the vast Siberian wilderness. As they set up camp, the children gathered firewood and explored their surroundings under their parents' watchful eyes. The crisp, fresh air was filled with the scent of pine needles and the earthy aroma of the forest floor. Igor, skilled in outdoor survival, built a fire pit, while Alina unpacked provisions, spreading bread, cheese, and cured meats on a blanket. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the clearing, the family settled down for dinner. The fire crackled and popped, sending sparks into the cool evening air. The aroma of cooking meat mingled with the forest's scents, carried away on the breeze. Unbeknownst to the Komarovs, a massive grizzly bear in the distance had picked up the scent of their meal. This creature, perfectly adapted to its harsh environment, was driven by a relentless hunger. It moved silently through the underbrush, its dark fur blending with the forest floor. The bear's acute senses allowed it to detect the faint sounds of laughter and see the flickering firelight between the trees. With each step, it drew closer. The Komarovs, oblivious to the danger, continued their meal as the light faded and the forest grew quieter. The usual sounds of wildlife diminished as nocturnal creatures began to stir. The fire's glow created a small island of warmth and comfort in the encroaching darkness. The bear was now so close it could smell the sweat on their skin and the faint hint of fear. It paused at the edge of the clearing, its eyes gleaming in the firelight as it observed the family with a predatory intelligence. Then, with a burst of speed that belied its size, the bear charged forward, crashing through the underbrush. The attack was sudden and ferocious. The bear lunged into the clearing, a force of nature that shattered the calm. The Komarovs had mere seconds to react. Igor, nearest the fire, was the first to recognize the danger. His heart raced as he turned, realizing the gravity of the situation. In that critical moment, his thoughts were consumed with protecting his family. As the bear closed in, chaos erupted. The once serene evening was now a tumult of primal fear and desperate action. The family scrambled to react, their evening of relaxation turning into a fight for survival against a relentless predator. Instinctively, Igor grabbed a burning log from the fire, brandishing it like a weapon. The bear, undeterred, met his defiance with a roar that shook the very trees. It swiped at him with a paw the size of a dinner plate. Claws extended, the blow connected with Igor's chest, sending him sprawling backward with air driven from his lungs. Pain exploded through his body, but there was no time to dwell on it. He had to fight. Alina screamed a sound that echoed in the vast emptiness around them as she tried to shield the children. But the bear was relentless, its hunger and fury driving it to tear into anything that moved. Igor struggled to his feet, ignoring the blood that soaked his shirt, and swung the burning log at the bear's face. The flames licked at its fur, singeing the tips, but the bear barely flinched. Instead, it reared up on its hind legs, towering over Igor, and brought both of its massive paws down with a force that could shatter bone. Igor collapsed under the blow, the log falling from his hands as he crumpled to the ground. The bear turned its attention to Alina and the children, who were frozen in place, their eyes wide with terror. For a brief moment, the clearing was filled with a terrible silence, the kind that precedes an inescapable doom. Then the bear attacked again, its primal instincts taking over as it closed in on the remaining members of the Komarov family. Alina tried to shield her children, using her body as a barrier between them and the beast. But the bear was unstoppable, its jaws snapping at anything within reach. It struck Alina with a force that sent her tumbling to the ground, her body limp as she hit the earth. Victor and Anya, too young to comprehend the full horror of what was happening, could do nothing but watch as the bear's rage was unleashed upon them. The animal's immense power was overwhelming, and in mere minutes the lives of the Komarov family were extinguished in a flurry of violence and blood. The bear, hunger-sated, dragged the bodies into the forest, leaving the once serene campsite a scene of unimaginable carnage. The fire continued to burn, casting flickering shadows on the trees as if the forest itself mourned the loss of the lives it had claimed. When local hunters arrived the next day, they were met with a profound silence. The clearing, once alive with the sounds of a family and nature, was now a grim tableau of death. The brutal remains of the Komarovs were scattered, torn apart by the bear's ferocity, and the ground was stained with blood. The hunters, seasoned in the wild's harsh realities, followed the bloodied trail more into the forest, their faces etched with grim determination. Knowing the bear, having tasted human flesh, would now be more dangerous, they proceeded cautiously. They eventually found the bear resting in a thicket, its bloodied fur marking its recent violence. The immense beast, with eyes reflecting primal intelligence, was a formidable threat. With heavy hearts, the hunters ended the bear's life, eliminating the danger it posed. News of the Komarov family's tragic end quickly spread, shaking the region. The incident underscored the lethal risks of remote wilderness, highlighting Siberia's brutal reality, where only the strong survive, and even then, survival is never assured. Arctic, with its vast expanse of ice and extreme conditions, is a realm where only the most resilient survive. Polar bears, apex predators in this unforgiving environment, face the harshest of challenges. A month-long expedition led by seasoned explorers aimed to document the effects of climate change in this hostile region. The team was aware of the dangers: biting cold, shifting ice, unpredictable weather, and the looming threat of polar bears. The team comprised 5 members: Graham, the experienced expedition leader; Aubrey, the young climatologist; Derek, a marine biologist studying the region's wildlife; Andre, an Arctic photographer; and Lamar, an expert in glaciology. Their mission was clear: gather crucial data on the Arctic's changing conditions. Each day, they ventured onto the ice, meticulously documenting the transformations occurring in the environment. Every aspect of the expedition was planned with precision. The team was equipped with cutting-edge thermal imaging technology, durable tents, flare guns, and early warning systems for detecting large animals. Yet, in the unpredictable Arctic, even the best-laid plans could falter. As the weeks progressed, the team observed alarming changes. Ice floes, once solid and stable, now cracked and drifted more frequently. Temperature fluctuations were more extreme, and wildlife sightings were scarce. Derek noted the absence of seals, a critical prey for polar bears. This absence suggested that hungry bears might become increasingly desperate and aggressive. One evening, while setting up camp on a drifting ice floe, the team was enveloped by the dim light of Arctic twilight. The horizon was a vast white expanse, occasionally interrupted by distant icebergs. Despite the serene appearance, there was an underlying tension. The day's grim findings had added weight to their mission. The team worked swiftly to establish their camp. They chose the floe for its stability, but were aware that the ice's unpredictability required them to remain alert and ready to move. Graham, ever vigilant, ensured that tripwires and flares were correctly placed, knowing that their presence might attract the Arctic's apex predators. As night fell and temperatures plummeted, the team huddled in their main tent, analyzing the day's data and planning for the days ahead. The flow's increasing drift added urgency to their discussions. They needed to act strategically to complete their mission before the end of the expedition. Unbeknownst to the team, a large male polar bear was prowling the flow's edges. Driven by hunger and desperation, the bear had been traversing the ice for days in search of seals. The bear's acute sense of smell had detected the explorer's scent from afar, guiding it toward their camp with relentless determination. The bear, its thick fur blending with the ice, approached the camp stealthily. The explorers remained unaware of the predator's presence, focusing on their work and discussions. The Arctic's vast and silent expanse held both beauty and danger, a constant reminder of the wilderness's unpredictability. As the bear approached the camp, it moved with a cautious, almost stealthy gait. It knew the terrain well, navigating the cracks and crevices in the ice with ease. The bear's massive paws, designed for traction on the slippery surface, made barely a sound. Its sharp and alert eyes scanned the camp, taking in the tents and the equipment. The bear could sense the presence of the humans, and its instincts were on high alert. Inside the tent, the team remained oblivious to the danger lurking outside. They were focused on their work, unaware that the bear had drawn dangerously close. The tripwires and flares, their first line of defense, were in place, but the bear, driven by hunger, was undeterred. It circled the camp, its nostrils flaring as it picked up the scent of food and human sweat. The bear's muscles tensed, its predatory instincts kicking in as it prepared to strike. As the night deepened, Graham decided to check the camp's perimeter one last time before turning in. He stepped out into the frigid air, his breath visible in the cold. He moved methodically, his flashlight cutting through the darkness, scanning for any signs of movement. He knew that in the Arctic, vigilance was essential to us, survival. But the bear, sensing the movement, had already set its sights on a different target. Lamar had ventured out to retrieve some equipment from a sled that had been left near the edge of the camp. He moved quickly, wanting to get back inside where it was warm. But as he approached the sled, the bear, driven by its primal need to feed, made its move. The attack was swift and brutal, a blur of motion in the dark. The polar bear lunged at Lamar with a force that belied its size, its mighty jaws clamping down on his shoulder and driving him to the ground. Lamar's survival instincts surged, but the bear's overwhelming strength made resistance nearly impossible. Its claws tore through his clothing and flesh, inflicting excruciating pain that radiated through his body. Lamar struggled, his hands flailing uselessly against the bear's thick fur. The creature's grip was relentless, its teeth sinking deeper with each second. His mind was a chaotic swirl of pain, fear, and disbelief. Despite his awareness of the risks and his preparedness for a potential encounter, nothing could have readied him for this brutal reality. The rest of the team heard the commotion and rushed outside, but by the time they reached Lamar, it was too late. The bear, sensing their approach, emitted a deep guttural growl that echoed across the ice. With a final, savage shake of its head, it dragged Lamar's lifeless body away into the darkness. The team was left in shock, struggling to process the horror of what had occurred. The icy wind carried the scent of blood, and the bear's growl, a grim reminder of their vulnerability. They realized that pursuing the bear would only lead to further tragedy. The stark reality of their situation hit hard. They were alone in one of Earth's most remote and unforgiving regions, at the mercy of a predator with no compassion. Seeking refuge, they retreated to their emergency shelter, a reinforced tent designed for extreme conditions, but offering little solace in the face of such violence. Huddled together, they shivered from both the cold and the raw fear that gripped them. The air was thick with shock, each member haunted by the memory of Lamar's screams. Graham, the leader, knew immediate action was necessary. He ordered an evacuation and sent out a distress call to their support team stationed miles away. The support team, well-versed in Arctic dangers, responded swiftly. Yet even as preparations for evacuation began, the weight of Lamar's loss hung heavily over them. Time seemed to stretch endlessly as they awaited rescue. The ordinarily peaceful Arctic sounds now felt ominous, as if the ice itself was closing in on them. The bear's attack had left a searing mark on their minds, a constant reminder of the peril that lurked in the Arctic's icy expanse. Their unity, once their strength, now felt fragile in the face of such a devastating loss. When the rescue team arrived, the explorers were physically unharmed, but emotionally shattered. They had come to the Arctic to study climate change and witness the environment's transformations. Still, instead, they were confronted with the brutal reality of survival in one of the planet's harshest landscapes. Rachel, drawn to the wild, had always found solace in the Sierra Nevada mountains with their rugged peaks and shadowy valleys. The allure of solitude and the challenge of navigating this terrain had long captivated her. Well prepared and experienced, she had meticulously studied maps, learned trails, and readied herself for any scenario. On this particular morning, the sky was a brilliant, endless blue. Rachel chose a remote trail she had hiked before, winding through thick pine forests and beside crystal-clear lakes where solitude reigned and only nature's sounds were present. As she walked, Rachel remained vigilant, aware of the wildlife that inhabited the Sierra Nevada. Armed with bear spray, a whistle, and a knife, she followed safety protocols to avoid startling a bear. The day was uneventful until she entered a shaded stretch and spotted a large black bear about 20 yards away. The bear, moving slowly, seemed unaware of her presence. Rachel froze and reached for her bear spray, her hand trembling. Unlike previous encounters, this bear did not retreat, but instead locked eyes with her, signaling a potentially dangerous situation. The bear's eyes were dark and unblinking. Rachel felt a surge of adrenaline as the bear took a step toward her. She tried to remember her training. Stay calm, don't run, make yourself look more prominent. But the bear wasn't following the usual script. It didn't pause, didn't hesitate. It kept coming, a low, menacing growl rumbling from deep within its chest. Rachel slowly began to back away, her heart pounding in her ears. The bear followed, its massive paws crunching on the forest floor. She raised her arms, trying to appear larger, trying to dissuade the bear from advancing. But the bear's demeanor had shifted. There was no fear, no curiosity, only aggression. She fumbled with the bear spray, her fingers clumsy with fear. The bear was close now. Too close. Rachel knew she was in grave danger. She aimed the spray and squeezed the trigger, releasing a cloud of fiery mist directly into the bear's face. The bear recoiled, shaking its head and snorting. For a brief moment, Rachel thought she had succeeded. The bear staggered back, pawing at its face. But the relief was short-lived. The bear, enraged by the burning in its eyes and nose, let out a roar and charged. Rachel barely had time to react. The bear barreled into her with the force of a freight train, knocking her off her feet. She hit the ground hard, the wind driven from her lungs in a painful rush. The bear was on her in an instant, its massive weight pinning her down. Rachel fought with everything she had. She kicked and thrashed, trying to push the bear off of her. She could feel the bear's hot breath on her face and smell the musky scent of its fur. The bear's claws raked across her chest, tearing through her jacket and into her flesh. She screamed in pain, a raw, primal sound that echoed through the trees. The bear's jaws closed around her arm, its teeth sinking deep into her flesh. She tried to pull free, but the bear's grip was like a vice, unrelenting and merciless. Every instinct in Rachel's body screamed at her to fight, to survive. She swung her free arm at the bear, hitting it with weak, desperate blows. She reached for the knife at her side, her fingers slick with blood as she fumbled to pull it from its sheath. The bear shook its head, tearing into her arm, and Rachel's vision blurred with the pain. With a final surge of strength, she managed to draw the knife. She stabbed at the bear's side, driving the blade into its thick hide. The bear roared, a sound of fury and pain. It reared back, releasing her arm, and Rachel seized the opportunity. She tried to crawl away, dragging herself across the ground, but her body was broken, her strength sapped. The bear lunged at Rachel, knocking her to the ground with a powerful swipe. Dazed, she saw the bear's massive form blotting out the sky, its bloodied muzzle dripping with her blood. Realizing her fate, Rachel fought with a knife, but her strikes were ineffective. The bear casually knocked the knife from her hand and clamped its jaws around her neck. The excruciating pain overwhelmed her, and darkness began to close in as her heart pounded fiercely. As the bear's grip tightened, Rachel's thoughts turned to her family, the mountains she loved, and the countless times she had walked these trails. Then, everything faded away. Later that day, other hikers found Rachel's body, having heard the struggle and the bear's roars, but arriving too late. The community was shocked by the tragedy, mourning the loss of a seasoned hiker. Authorities set up patrols and issued warnings, ultimately tracking and euthanizing the bear for public safety. Rachel's death was a sad reminder of the wild's unpredictable danger. Mitchell defied stereotypes. At 354 pounds, she was a picture of resilience and determination, proving that physical fitness wasn't confined to any particular body shape. Her passion for hiking was born out of a desire to connect with nature, push her limits, and find solace away from the bustling world. Her latest challenge was a solo trek through Yellowstone National Park, a place renowned for its breathtaking landscapes and diverse wildlife. She had prepared meticulously for this trip. Her gear was top of the line, a sturdy backpack, high-quality hiking boots, and a GPS tracker. She carried an emergency beacon, a first aid kit, and most importantly, bear spray. Donna had read countless articles and guides on hiking in bear country, understanding the risks and how to mitigate them. She had practiced using the bear spray multiple times, ensuring she could deploy it swiftly if needed. On July 7th, 2024, the weather was perfect for her trek. The sky was clear, the air was crisp, and the trails were relatively quiet. Donna began her journey early in the morning, her spirits high as she marveled at the beauty around her. The majestic mountains, the lush forests, and the serene rivers all seemed to welcome her. She moved at her own pace, taking time to enjoy the sights and sounds of nature. The first few days of her hike were uneventful. She encountered other hikers occasionally, exchanged friendly nods, and even had brief conversations with some. Her nights were spent in designated camping areas, where she followed all the guidelines for storing food and disposing of waste to avoid attracting bears. Every evening, she would sit by her small campfire, reflecting on the day's experiences and the natural wonders she had witnessed. On the fourth day of her hike, Donna decided to venture deeper into the less traveled parts of the park. She was drawn to the promise of untouched beauty, eager to explore areas where few had trodden. The trail became narrower and the forest denser. She crept, aware of every sound around her, the chirping of birds, the rustling of leaves, and the occasional snap of a twig under her feet became her companions. As the afternoon sun filtered through the canopy, casting dappled shadows on the ground, Donna's attention was caught by an unusual noise. It was a low, guttural sound, followed by the rustling of bushes nearby. Her heart rate quickened, and she instinctively reached for her bear spray. She scanned her surroundings, trying to pinpoint the source of the sound. Then she saw them, a mother grizzly and her two cubs, not more than 50 yards away. The mother bear's eyes locked onto Donna's. In that split second, Donna felt a surge of fear and adrenaline. She remembered the advice she had read. Remain calm. Make yourself look more extensive and slowly back away. She raised her arms, gripping the bear spray tightly, and began to retreat. However, Johan Lane, a seasoned backpacker with an unyielding love for the great outdoors, had long dreamed of traversing the vast, unspoiled forests of Finland. Johan, a native Finn with a sturdy frame and a rugged disposition, relished these opportunities to disconnect from the modern world and reconnect with nature's raw beauty. Having spent countless hours preparing for his journey, Johan meticulously planned every aspect of his trip. He pored over maps, studied weather patterns, and honed his survival skills. He knew the risks. The forest could be both a sanctuary and a perilous expanse. Armed with a well-stocked backpack, a reliable tent, and an assortment of survival gear, he felt ready to embrace whatever challenges lay ahead. On the third day of his journey, Johan's path led him to a remote lake, its waters a mirror reflecting the sky and surrounding trees. It was an idyllic spot, far from any signs of civilization. As evening approached, he decided this would be his campsite for the night. He pitched his tent near the shoreline, the soft lapping of water providing a soothing backdrop. He gathered firewood, arranged it into a neat pile, and set about preparing his meal. The smell of cooking meat and vegetables soon filled the air, mingling with the earthy scent of the forest. Johan finished his meal and tidied up his campsite, carefully packing away his food supplies in a bear-proof container and stowing it a safe distance from his tent. He knew the importance of proper food storage in bear country, a lesson ingrained in him through years of outdoor experience. Satisfied with his precautions, he settled into his tent, the warmth of his sleeping bag cocooning him against the cool night air. Just as he began to drift into sleep, a faint rustling outside jolted him awake. His heart quickened as he lay still, ears straining to identify the source. The sound grew louder, closer, and unmistakably deliberate. Without warning, a massive shape emerged from the shadows, charging towards his camp with a ferocity that left no time for hesitation. Johan's body reacted instinctively, adrenaline surging through his veins as he scrambled out of his tent. The bear, drawn by the lingering scent of his dinner, was upon him in an instant. Its sheer size and power were overwhelming, a force of nature that could not be reasoned with. Johan barely had time to register the pain as the bear's claws raked across his back, tearing through clothing and flesh. He stumbled, trying to put distance between himself and the beast, but the bear was relentless. A powerful swipe to his leg sent him sprawling. the world spinning as he fought to maintain consciousness. Bloodied and battered, he knew that his survival hinged on his ability to think clearly and act decisively. Johann forced himself to focus. The bear was temporarily distracted by the remnants of his campfire, and that curiosity provided a brief window of opportunity. He seized a burning branch, the makeshift torch flickering with the promise of life. Summoning every ounce of strength, he thrust the flame toward the bear, the heat and light startling it momentarily. The bear recoiled, giving Johann precious seconds to act. Ignoring the searing pain that coursed through his body, Johann pushed himself to his feet and limped towards the lake. He knew he couldn't outrun the bear, but water might offer some protection. The bear hesitated. Its primal instincts conflicted with the unfamiliar threat of fire and water. Johann plunged into the frigid lake. The cold was a shock to his system, but a necessary discomfort. The bear paced the shoreline, its frustration evident. Johann held the torch high, its light reflecting off the water's surface. Minutes felt like hours as he waited, his breath ragged and his wounds throbbing. Eventually, the bear lost interest, retreating into the darkness from which it came. Only then did Johann allow himself a moment of relief, his body trembling from the cold and the adrenaline crash. He knew he couldn't stay in the lake indefinitely. The ranger station, a beacon of safety and aid, was several kilometers away. He had marked it on his map earlier, a precautionary note that now proved invaluable. Summoning his remaining strength, he waded to the shore and began the arduous trek, each step a battle against pain and fatigue. Hours later, as dawn's first light began to pierce the canopy, Johann spotted the ranger station. It stood like a sentinel in the wilderness, a humble structure that represented hope and salvation. His vision blurred, his steps faltering, but he pressed on, fueled by the promise of rescue. He stumbled through the door, collapsing on the floor, his voice barely a whisper as he called for help. The Rangers acted swiftly, their training and expertise turning chaos into order. They assessed his injuries, staunching the bleeding and administering first aid. Johann drifted in and out of consciousness, the pain receding into a dull throb as shock set in. He felt the jolt of the emergency vehicle, the distant wail of a siren, and the sterile comfort of a hospital room. Weeks later, Johann lay in a hospital bed, his body a testament to the brutal encounter. His back bore the scars of the bear's claws, his legs stitched together with the precision of modern medicine. The journey to recovery was long, but he faced it with the same resilience that had carried him through the forest. He knew he had been lucky, and his survival was a combination of training, instinct, and sheer will. David Ross had been planning his trip to the Italian Alps for over a year. He had meticulously researched the best trails, the most breathtaking viewpoints, and the hidden gems known only to locals. This trip was meant to be a retreat from the pressures of his high-powered job in New York City, a chance to immerse himself in nature and rejuvenate his spirit. The Italian Alps, with their majestic peaks and serene valleys, offered the perfect escape. David had always loved the mountains, having spent his childhood summers hiking with his family in the Rockies. As he arrived in the quaint village of Cortina d'Ampezzo, he felt a wave of nostalgia and excitement wash over him. The town, nestled in a picturesque valley, was a blend of charming old-world architecture and modern amenities, catering to tourists from around the globe. David spent his first few days acclimating to the altitude and exploring the village. He visited the local markets, sampled traditional Italian cuisine, and chatted with the friendly locals. Everywhere he went, he marveled at the stunning backdrop of the Dolomite Mountains, their jagged peaks rising dramatically against the clear blue sky. He couldn't wait to explore them up close. On the morning of his third day, David set out early to tackle one of the more popular hiking trails, known for its panoramic views and challenging terrain. He packed his backpack with essentials, water, snacks, a first aid kit, and his camera, eager to capture the beauty of the landscape. The trailhead was just a short walk from his hotel, and as he began his ascent, he felt a surge of energy and anticipation. The trail wound through dense forests and across open meadows, each turn revealing a new vista more breathtaking than the last. David took his time, stopping frequently to photograph wildflowers, cascading streams, and the distant snow-capped peaks. Around midday, David reached a particularly scenic spot, a rocky outcrop that offered an unobstructed view of the valley below and the surrounding peaks. He decided to take a break and have lunch, sitting on a flat rock with his legs dangling over the edge. He munched on a sandwich and sipped water, his gaze wandering across the vast, undulating landscape. The air was crisp and cool, and the sun was pleasantly warm on his skin. After finishing his meal, David pulled out his camera again, eager to capture the stunning panorama. He stood up, adjusted the settings, and began framing his shot. Lost in the act of composition, he didn't notice the subtle shift in the atmosphere. It wasn't until he heard a faint rustling behind him that he turned around. At first, he saw nothing unusual, just the familiar trees and underbrush. But then, out of the corner of his eye, he caught a movement. A massive, dark shape emerged from the foliage, moving with a quiet, purposeful gait. David's heart skipped a beat as he realized what it was. A bear, a large brown bear, and it was heading in his direction. He froze, his mind racing. He had read about bear encounters in his hiking guides, but nothing could have prepared him for the reality of facing one in the wild. He knew he should remain calm, avoid making sudden movements, and slowly back away. But fear had a tight grip on him, and his instincts screamed for him to run. The bear paused, sniffing the air, its tiny eyes locking onto David. For a moment, they stood there, man and beast, in a tense standoff. Then, as if a switch had been flipped, the bear charged. David turned and ran, his heart pounding, adrenaline surging through his veins. He could hear the heavy thuds of the bear's paws on the ground behind him, growing louder and closer. Despite his best efforts, David stumbled on the uneven terrain, his foot catching on a loose rock. He fell hard, the impact knocking the wind out of him. Before he could scramble to his feet, the bear was upon him. Pain exploded in his side as the bear's claws raked across his body, and he screamed, a raw, primal sound of terror and agony. Nearby hikers heard his cries and rushed toward the source of the noise. They arrived at a horrific scene. David was bloodied and barely conscious, with the bear standing over him. Acting quickly, they used their trekking poles and whistles to create a loud, chaotic commotion. The bear, startled and confused by the sudden onslaught of noise and movement, retreated into the forest. The hikers immediately set to work, administering first aid to David while one of them called for emergency assistance. They tried to keep him conscious, talking to him, reassuring him that help was on the way. The minutes stretched into an eternity as they waited for the rescue team, their faces etched with concern. When the helicopter finally arrived, it felt like a lifeline thrown into a raging sea. Paramedics swiftly secured David onto a stretcher and airlifted him to the nearest hospital. His injuries were severe, deep lacerations, a fractured rib, and significant blood loss. He was rushed into surgery, and the medical team worked tirelessly to stabilize him. David drifted in and out of consciousness over the next several days. He was dimly aware of the beeping machines, the hushed voices of the doctors and nurses, the antiseptic smell of the hospital. His body ached, each breath a painful reminder of his ordeal. But he was alive, and for that, he was profoundly grateful. As he began to recover, David learned more about the extent of his injuries and the surgeries he had undergone. The doctors had repaired the damage as best they could, but his recovery would be long and arduous. Physical therapy, follow-up surgeries, and a lengthy rehabilitation process awaited him. The incident had a ripple effect far beyond David's ordeal. News of the bear attack spread quickly, making headlines and raising alarm among locals and tourists alike. The Italian authorities launched an investigation, seeking to understand what had led to the bear's aggressive behavior. They also reviewed existing safety protocols for hikers, recognizing the need for more stringent measures to prevent such incidents in the future. The Ivanov family, consisting of Sergei, his wife Olga, and their 3 children, Anna, Nikolai, and the youngest, Alexei, set out on a summer camping trip in the Urals. It was meant to be a much-needed escape from the hustle and bustle of their urban life in Moscow. Sergei, a stoic man with a rugged demeanor, had always dreamt of sharing the beauty of nature with his family. He envisioned days filled with hiking, fishing, and evenings gathered around a campfire under the star-studded sky. The journey to the Urals was long but filled with excitement. As they drove through the vast expanse of Russian countryside, the children marveled at the changing landscapes. From the dense forest to the rolling hills and finally to the majestic mountain range of the Urals, the scenery was a breathtaking prelude to their adventure. They arrived at the campsite in the early afternoon. Sergei's chosen location was perfect, secluded yet not too far from a small village where they could get supplies if needed. The site was nestled beside a serene lake surrounded by towering pine trees that whispered secrets to the wind. Setting up camp was a family affair. The tent was pitched on a flat patch of grass, and a makeshift kitchen area was established near the campfire pit. Sergei and Nikolai gathered firewood while Anna and Olga organized the supplies. Little Alexei, a curious and energetic 5-year-old, busied himself collecting colorful pebbles by the lakeshore. The first few days were idyllic. They spent their mornings hiking the trails that wound through the forest, afternoons swimming in the calm, clear lake, and evenings fishing. Sergei taught Nikolai how to cast a fishing line while Olga and Anna prepared meals with the fresh fish they caught. Alexei, with his boundless energy, darted around, chasing butterflies and exploring the undergrowth. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Sergei decided to treat the family to a particular barbecue. The aroma of marinated meat grilling over the fire wafted through the air, mingling with the scent of pine and wildflowers. It was a perfect moment, the kind that Sergei had envisioned when planning the trip. As dusk settled in, the family gathered around the campfire to enjoy their meal. The crackling fire cast a warm glow, and the sounds of laughter filled the air. Sergei felt a deep sense of contentment, watching his family enjoy the simple pleasures of life. They stayed by the fire until the stars emerged, bright and countless against the velvet sky. Unbeknownst to the Ivanovs, the scent of their barbecue had attracted an unwanted visitor. Deep in the forest, a bear caught the tantalizing aroma. Driven by hunger and curiosity, the bear began to make its way toward the campsite. The dense foliage and twilight shadows concealed its approach, making the animal nearly invisible. The first sign of danger came as a rustling in the bushes. Sergei, ever vigilant, noticed the movement and felt a prickle of unease. He dismissed it as a small animal, perhaps a fox or a raccoon. But the rustling grew louder and more pronounced, and the shadows seemed to move with purpose. The bear emerged from the forest, a hulking mass of fur and muscle. Its eyes gleamed with hunger, and its robust frame moved with surprising stealth. The family, engrossed in their activities, didn't notice the predator until it was too late. The bear lunged into the campsite with a terrifying roar. Chaos erupted as the family scrambled in different directions. Olga and Anna grabbed Nikolai and Alexei, pulling them toward the vehicle parked a short distance away. Sergei, realizing the immediate danger to his family, grabbed the camping axe he had used earlier to chop firewood. The bear, driven by hunger and the irresistible scent of food, charged at the youngest member of the family. Alexei, frozen in fear, was directly in its path. Sergei's heart pounded as he hurled himself between the bear and his son. With a mighty swing, he brought the axe down on the bear's shoulder, aiming to drive it away. The blow momentarily stunned the bear, but it quickly recovered, its fury now directed at Sergei. It swiped at him with a massive paw, the claws tearing through his jacket and into his flesh. Sergei felt a searing pain but stood his ground, swinging the axe again and again, trying to keep the bear at bay. Olga and the children reached the vehicle and frantically climbed inside. She turned to see her husband, bloodied and struggling, fighting for their lives. Her mind raced, knowing she had to protect her children but also wanting to help Sergei. The vehicle's horn blared as she leaned on it, hoping to scare the bear away or attract help. Sergei fought with every ounce of his strength, his vision blurring from pain and exertion. The bear's sheer power was overwhelming, and Sergei knew he couldn't hold out much longer. He swung the axe in wide arcs, each strike driven by a desperate will to survive and protect his family. The bear, though injured and bleeding, continued its assault. Sergei was knocked to the ground, the axe slipping from his grasp. He kicked and punched, his movements growing weaker. Just as the bear reared back for another strike, the sound of the vehicle's horn and the sight of approaching headlights from a nearby camper spooked it. The bear hesitated, growled one last time, and then retreated into the forest, disappearing into the shadows. Olga rushed to Sergei's side, her hands trembling as she assessed his injuries. He was severely wounded, with deep gashes and bruises covering his body. Despite his condition, Sergei managed a weak smile, relieved that his family was safe. Help arrived shortly after, with fellow campers who had heard the commotion. They quickly provided first aid and helped Olga get Sergei into the vehicle. The nearest hospital was hours away, and every minute counted. Olga drove through the winding forest roads with fierce determination, her mind focused solely on saving her husband. The drive to the hospital felt like an eternity. Olga kept glancing at Sergei, his breathing labored and his face pale. The children huddled in the back seat were silent, their eyes wide with fear and confusion. The reality of the attack had left them shaken, their innocent view of the world forever altered. They reached the hospital and Sergei was rushed into surgery. Olga and the children waited in the sterile waiting room, the tension palpable. Hours passed, each one feeling more extended than the last. Finally, a doctor emerged, his expression grave but hopeful. Sergei had survived the surgery, but his recovery would be long and arduous. The Ivanov family stayed in a nearby motel during Sergei's initial recovery. The ordeal had left them physically and emotionally scarred, but he reassured them with his presence, his determination to recover evident in every painful movement. David Parker, a 27-year-old IT enthusiast from Toronto, has recently discovered his enthusiasm for the great outdoors. After spending the most of his adult life behind screens and in bustling cities, David sought refuge and peace in the middle of nature. He'd become an enthusiastic hiker and camper, frequently retreating to the outdoors on weekends to clear his head. Camping allowed David to unplug from the digital world and reconnect with a part of him that he believed to be more authentic and calmer. David planned a vacation to Canada's Banff National Park in June 2023, with the intention of embarking on the ultimate adventure. Banff, located in the Canadian Rockies, was a breathtakingly beautiful destination known for its towering peaks, turquoise lakes, and many animals. It was a haven for those seeking solitude and a stronger connection to nature. However, it was also home to one of North America's largest grizzly bear populations. David was aware of the risks. He had read the brochures, watched the videos, and even attended a brief bear safety workshop before entering the park. He knew to keep his food in bear-proof containers, cook away from his sleeping quarters, and create noise while hiking to avoid surprising a bear. He believed he had done everything correctly, but he was wrong. On June 11, 2023, after a long day of hiking, David pitched his tent in a remote place near a beautiful mountain lake. The location was ideal, far from the main routes, with a breathtaking view of the surrounding peaks reflected in the river. As night fell, David had a simple dinner beside the lake, taking care to follow all of the recommended bear safety precautions. He then retreated to his tent, feeling calm under the big, starry sky. But in the dark wilderness, danger often lurks unseen. Unbeknownst to David, a hungry grizzly bear was roaming the area. The bear, undoubtedly lured by the aroma of food and potentially no stranger to human presence from past encounters, had been circling the campground. Hunger intensified the bear's instincts, and despite David's precautions, the animal focused on his tent. The attack took place well after midnight. David was deep asleep, unaware of the danger that was closing up on him. The bear approached the tent in eerie silence, its huge form hardly making a sound as it moved through the underbrush. Then, with a sudden ferocity, the animal ripped through the tent's canvas. David woke up to a nightmare. There was a brief moment of confusion in the pitch-black darkness before he realized what was going on. The bear's enormous claws tore through the canvas, slicing at his torso with merciless effectiveness. David hardly had time to scream as the bear's teeth clamped down on his arm and torso. The pain was excruciating, taking his breath away. He attempted to fight back, pushing the bear away, but it was hopeless. The grizzly was too strong, too determined to kill. It pinned David to the ground, crushing him while it continued to attack. David's thoughts were a jumble of fear and disbelief. How could this be happening? He had done everything right and followed every rule. The attack was brief, but it felt like a lifetime. Perhaps sensing that David was no longer a threat, the bear departed into the darkness, leaving him bleeding and broken in the shredded ruins of his tent. David lay there, his life draining away as the chilly mountain air flooded the night. He was alone, in a spot he had come to find serenity, that had now become the scene of a fatal encounter with the wild, the scene of his death. He couldn't move, and he could barely breathe. It took hours before he took his last breaths. The following morning, a party of campers passing through the region made the grim discovery. They found David's body lifeless and mangled and quickly notified park rangers. The news of the incident spread rapidly, Rangers tracked the bear using its prints and traces of blood, eventually locating and euthanizing it to prevent further attacks. But David was gone forever, despite all the precautions he had taken. The incident raised serious concerns about the increasing number of bear encounters in Banff National Park, prompting discussions on how to better protect visitors while preserving the natural habitat of these magnificent but dangerous creatures.